Imagine witnessing this unbelievable moment unfold right before your eyes. Would you have believed it if it wasn't caught on camera? Where are you watching from? Drop your location in the comments below. And if this story kept you on the edge of your seat, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. Because tomorrow, we're bringing you another incredible tale you won't want to miss. Stay tuned, because some stories need to be seen to be believed. A knife was thrown at the royal guard. What happened next left the crowd stunned. The crisp autumn air settled over Buckingham Palace as the morning sun painted golden streaks across the historic facade. The streets of London were alive with the hum of tourists, their eager voices blending with the rhythmic sounds of footsteps on the palace grounds. Standing at unwavering attention was Sergeant Daniel Carter, a 30-year-old British Royal Guard, his scarlet tunic and towering bearskin hat gleaming in the sunlight. He had been in this exact position countless times before, yet today, something felt different. Beyond the usual crowd of visitors snapping photos and pointing excitedly, one man stood apart. Unlike the others, he didn't move, didn't speak, didn't even lift a camera. Dressed in a long black coat with gloved hands despite the mild 65-degree weather, he remained completely still. His sharp, calculating eyes never left Carter's position. To most, he was just another bystander, but to someone trained in combat awareness, his presence felt off. Colonel Richard Lawson, a 62-year-old retired Marine officer, was visiting London with his 8-year-old grandson, Ethan. They had come to see the famous changing of the guard, a tradition that fascinated the young boy. But while Ethan excitedly tugged at his grandfather's sleeve, pointing at the guards with wide-eyed curiosity, Lawson's attention was elsewhere. His instincts, sharpened by years of deployments in Iraq and Afghanistan, immediately locked onto the suspicious figure in black. The man's unnatural stillness, the way he seemed to scan the security layout rather than admire the palace, sent a wave of unease through Lawson's gut. He had seen this kind of behavior before, just moments before an attack. His military mind raced through possibilities. Was it paranoia? Or was there something more sinister unfolding right in front of them? "Grandpa, why doesn't he move?" Ethan asked, his voice innocent, unaware of the tension creeping into his grandfather's stance. Lawson crouched beside the boy, his eyes never leaving the man in the black coat. "Because some people aren't here to watch," he murmured. In that moment, Sergeant Carter remained as still as ever, but inside, his senses were already shifting. He had seen this before, too. In war zones, in places where stillness was the prelude to chaos. Though his face betrayed nothing, a single thought pulsed in his mind. Something wasn't right. The morning air remained crisp, but tension had begun to weave itself into the usual hum of tourists outside Buckingham Palace. Sergeant Daniel Carter, still standing at rigid attention, kept his eyes locked forward, but his mind was sharpening, dissecting every movement in his periphery. He had learned long ago that danger didn't announce itself with loud warnings. It crept in silently, disguised as normalcy, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. The man in the black coat had not moved. That was the problem. Tourists came and went, pausing for pictures, adjusting their scarves, checking their phones. But this man remained unnaturally still, his posture stiff, his eyes never straying from Carter. That kind of focus wasn't admiration. It was calculation. A few feet away, Colonel Richard Lawson felt it too. Years of combat experience had fine-tuned his instincts, and every alarm in his head was going off. He had seen men like this before, standing just outside the blast radius of an IED, waiting to see if their plan worked. His grip tightened slightly on his grandson Ethan's shoulder. The black-coated man finally moved. Slowly, deliberately, he began shifting through the crowd. He wasn't just walking, he was studying. His gloved hands remained tucked inside his coat, his gaze scanning entry points, distances, and reaction times. Every step was precise. Carter's grip on his rifle remained steady, but inside, his body was coiled, ready. He had spent years in Afghanistan learning the signs of an imminent threat. There was a pattern, a rhythm to these moments before chaos. He could feel it now. Then, a glint of metal. It was faint, barely noticeable, but Lawson saw it first, a brief flicker beneath the man's coat as he adjusted his stance. Not a phone, not a camera. Something else, something far more dangerous. Without hesitation, Lawson took a step forward, placing himself between the stranger and Ethan. "We need to move," he said quietly, his voice calm but firm. Ethan blinked up at him. Why? Because not everyone here is just a tourist. Carter's pulse steadied, his breath even, his muscles tightening beneath his uniform. The man had positioned himself exactly right, not too close to cause immediate concern, but well within striking distance. Something was coming, and when it did, Carter knew he would have only seconds to react. The air outside Buckingham Palace felt heavier now, thick with an unease that only a few had noticed. Sergeant Daniel Carter remained still, but his pulse had settled into the familiar rhythm of battle readiness. His body knew what his mind had already confirmed. This wasn't just another tourist with an agenda. This was a threat. The man in the black coat had edged closer, his movements too precise, too measured. Carter didn't need to look directly at him to track his approach. Every step, every shift in weight, it all told a story. The gloved hands still tucked inside the coat? That was the final warning. Colonel Richard Lawson had already moved, guiding Ethan behind a nearby stone pillar. His grandson's excited curiosity had faded, replaced by something quieter, something closer to instinctive fear. Lawson knelt beside him, his voice low but steady. No matter what happens, you stay here. Do you understand? Ethan nodded, eyes wide. He didn't fully grasp what was happening, but he knew enough to listen. Then it happened. In one sudden, fluid motion, the man yanked his hand from his coat. A combat knife, its serrated edge catching the sunlight, flashed into view. There was no hesitation, no flourish, just a swift, practiced movement as he reared back and hurled the blade straight at Carter's chest. Gasps ripped through the crowd. Someone screamed. Parents pulled their children back. But Carter, he didn't flinch. Time slowed. His mind registered every detail. The blade's rotation, the angle of its trajectory, the split-second window to act. And then his hand moved. With lightning speed, his white-gloved fingers closed around the handle mid-spin. The impact reverberated through his arm, but he absorbed it effortlessly, shifting his stance just enough to maintain his balance. For a heartbeat, there was silence, a stunned, collective inhalation as the weight of what had just happened settled over the courtyard. Tourists, frozen in shock, stared at the soldier who had just caught a flying knife bare-handed, a move so impossibly fast, so precise, that it almost seemed rehearsed. But it wasn't. It was instinct, training, discipline, and then chaos. The attacker spun, shoving past stunned bystanders, bolting toward the palace gates. But Carter wasn't done. He had the knife. Now he needed the man. The moment the attacker bolted, the crowd erupted into chaos. Screams echoed through the courtyard as tourists stumbled backward, trying to make sense of what had just happened. Some scrambled for cover, others stood frozen, their phones raised in trembling hands. But Sergeant Daniel Carter was already moving. His fingers tightened around the captured knife, its weight solid in his grip. His other hand remained steady on his rifle. Ready but restrained. There was no need to fire, not yet. His focus locked onto the fleeing figure, weaving erratically through the dispersing crowd, searching for an escape. Not on my watch. Colonel Richard Lawson saw it too. The attacker was heading for the main gate, where the barriers were still open for the morning foot traffic. If he made it through, he could vanish into the streets of London, blending into the chaos he had created. That couldn't happen. Lawson reacted instinctively, his years of military service kicking in like muscle memory. With a precise, calculated movement, he extended his leg at just the right moment. The attacker never saw it coming. His foot caught the man's ankle, sending him crashing down onto the pavement. The impact was brutal. His shoulder slammed into the stone, his head bouncing against the ground with a dull thud. The knife attack had failed, and now, so had his escape. Carter closed the distance in seconds. He wasn't running, he was advancing. Every step was measured, controlled. His posture remained impeccable, even as he moved from ceremonial guard to combat soldier. The attacker groaned, trying to push himself up, but it was too late. Palace security swarmed him, pinning his arms behind his back, forcing him into submission. His breath was ragged, his mask half pulled from his face, revealing a young man, no older than 25, his expression twisted in rage and disbelief. Carter stood over him, breathing evenly, his heart rate barely raised. He looked down at the man who had tried to turn this place of history into a crime scene. The same discipline that had allowed him to catch the knife had carried him through firefights in Afghanistan. And now, it had ensured this man never got the chance to hurt anyone. Lawson exhaled, finally standing upright. He turned, locking eyes with Carter, a silent exchange between two men who understood what had just been prevented. The crowd watched, still in shock. Somewhere, applause began. The sound of heavy boots striking the pavement echoed through the courtyard as palace security officers pinned the attacker to the ground, forcing his arms behind his back. His breath came in ragged gasps, his body tense with resistance. But it was over. The young man, no older than 25, had failed. The knife he had hurled with deadly intent was now firmly in the grip of Sergeant Daniel Carter, the very soldier he had tried to take down. Carter stood tall. Adjusting his stance as security, secured the attacker in handcuffs. His mask finally yanked away to reveal a face that was shockingly ordinary. Not a hardened terrorist, not some shadowy assassin, just a man consumed by his own misguided beliefs, staring up at the soldier who had ruined his moment. "You really thought we were just statues, didn't you?" Carter's voice was low, steady, his eyes locked on the attackers. No anger, no gloating, just truth. The young man scoffed, shaking his head, his lip curling with defiance. "You're dressed like a relic, protecting symbols of oppression," he spat. "You stand here for show, playing soldier while the real world burns." Carter's fingers instinctively brushed the campaign ribbons on his chest, each one a silent marker of battles fought, of brothers lost, of sacrifices made in places far harsher than Buckingham Palace. He had stood in the scorching heat of Helmand Province, not for tradition, but for the men beside him. He had fought in the dust of foreign streets, not for ceremony, but for something bigger than himself. "You think I'm playing soldier?" Carter asked, his voice carrying the weight of every mission, every life or death moment he had survived. He took a step closer, lowering his voice so only the attacker could hear. "The same discipline that let me catch your knife? It's the same discipline that kept me alive in war zones you'll never understand." A hush had fallen over the crowd. The tourists who had once been laughing, posing for pictures, now stood in silent awe. Some still clutched their phones, but none were filming now. They weren't just watching a royal guard. They were witnessing a soldier who had just saved lives without ever firing a shot. Carter exhaled slowly then. With the same precision that had defined his every movement, he turned and resumed his post. His white-gloved hands returned to position, his gaze fixed forward, his body motionless once again. The ceremony had resumed, but now everyone knew the truth. These soldiers were never just standing still. This was more than just a moment of danger. It was a powerful reminder of what true discipline, training, and duty look like. Sergeant Carter didn't just wear the uniform. He embodied everything it stood for. In an instant, he went from standing guard to defending lives, proving that the British Royal Guards are more than just ceremonial figures. But let's talk about you. What would you have done if you were there? Would you have noticed the attacker before he struck? How do you feel knowing that moments like this can happen in places we least expect? Drop a comment below and tell us where you're watching from. Have you ever visited Buckingham Palace? Did this story change how you view the Royal Guard? We want to hear your thoughts. And if you found this story as incredible as we did, make sure you're subscribed and turn on notifications, because tomorrow, we're bringing you another jaw-dropping tale that you won't want to miss. Real stories, real moments, real heroes. Stay with us as we uncover them all. See you in the next one.